You know, as you consider all that we've talked about this morning, there's a lot to process. There's a lot to download. You're answering the question, what is calling, confirming it, clarifying it, navigating those competing voices. So if you just need to catch your mental breath, let's just take a moment and just breathe it in, breathe it out. Let's kind of regather ourselves and kind of think a little bit about all that we've heard and all that we've listened to as we gear up and we consider what's coming next. So as you kind of get maybe a brief refreshment, as you catch your mental breath, let me introduce you to our next speaker. He's a good friend of mine who teaches here at Southeastern Seminary. He teaches for us in the college at Southeastern. Locke. Ron is actually an instructor of urban ministry and preaching. He's actually the director of our Center for Preaching and Pastoral Leadership. And Ron has served in a variety of ministry capacities, but he also came to us from serving as a pastor in Maryland, where he was ministering in a very difficult and dark context. As he was navigating that, God gave him some really great insights through his personal and practical experience that he wants to share with us today, not just as it relates to difficult circumstances, but really the bigger picture. How to leverage your calling for the mission. You know, we've talked about our individual calling and that it is unique, that God's gifted us and called us according to how He's designed us and according to His plan for our lives. But each one of our individual plans ultimately fits within a broader picture, the broader scope of God's redemptive plan throughout history. This redemptive plan that includes you and me really is missional in its nature. It's why we do what we do here at Southeastern. Because what we're understanding is that we're trying to equip students to serve the local church and fulfill the Great Commission. That Great Commission is God's marching orders, the final words that Jesus gave, and last words should be lasting words, as we like to say around here, that Christ has commissioned us all. And so all of our callings, whatever various contexts or platforms that He may be calling us to, ultimately fit within that mission. So Ron Jor is going to share with us a little bit more about how we can understand how to leverage your calling for the mission and the cause of Christ.
Hi, my name is Ron Locke, and I direct the Center for Preaching and Pastoral Leadership here at Southeastern Seminary. It's my joy to join you today as you are contemplating the calling that the Lord has placed on your life and how you are going to use that for His great cause, for the sake of the gospel and for His glory among our neighbors and among the nations. Today I wanted to talk about leveraging your calling for the mission. Leveraging your calling for the mission. To do that, I want you to picture a scene with me, okay? There you are, sitting in a church building, and as you're sitting in the church building, you notice that everybody around you begins to stand. And as you stand, you notice everyone turns their heads to the back of the room. And so you naturally join them and you turn your head to the back of the room to see what's going on. As you do so, the doors in the back of the sanctuary open up. And there she is, walking down the aisle, the bride with her dad by her side. As she's walking, she comes past you. Everybody goes from looking backwards to turning towards the front. And you see her as she comes up to stand next to her groom with the pastor there in front. And as the pastor begins to start his normal speech, "Dearly beloved, we have gathered here today," and so on. All of a sudden, you notice the best man just kind of barge his way into the front, shove the groom out of the way, and he stands and takes the bride's hand and says, "You may continue now, Pastor." Now, if you were a guest there, and you saw that happen, what would be the look on your face? Could you even imagine the look on everybody else's faces? And could you imagine the look on the bride and the groom's face? I mean, what kind of guy would do something like that? What person would barge his way into the middle of a wedding ceremony to make himself the guy, to make himself the groom, to steal the bride away from the actual groom? Who would do something like that? Well, the reality is, as we think about ministry, and we think about the calling that God has placed on our lives, I'm sad to say that many of us find ourselves in that very position. We are the best man, if you will, barging our way into the relationship between the bride and the groom to make ourselves now the star of the show. Unfortunately, there are many who have received a calling from God, just like you have, to serve the church, to get the gospel to the ends of the earth. And somewhere along the line, they have turned the focus from the Lord to themselves. But that's not what we want for you. We want you to stay focused. We want you to recognize the goal of this ministry, to recognize why the Lord has called you. The Lord has called you so that you would use the gifts and the skills and the talents that God has given you for the purpose of making His name great, not for making your name great. So, how do we leverage our calling for this great mission? How do we use these gifts that the Lord has given us so that we can then make His name great wherever the Lord has placed us and wherever He will take us? Well, there's a conversation that goes on in the book of John, John's Gospel in chapter 3, where John the Baptist, not John the Apostle who's writing here, John the Baptist had a little dilemma. It really wasn't a dilemma with him. It was a dilemma with his disciples that had a bit of a conflict with Jesus and Jesus's disciples. Let me paint the picture here. In John 3, verse 22, it says, "After this, Jesus and his disciples went into the Judean countryside, and he remained there with them and was baptizing." All right, so Jesus and his disciples are there in the countryside, and there he's teaching, he's making disciples. Folks are coming to faith in him. They're starting to follow him and his ministry. They believe that he is the Messiah, that he is the Son of God, and he's baptizing them into their fellowship. He's baptizing them into this new community here of his disciples. Now, in verse 23, it says, John also was baptizing in Aenon near Salem, because water was plentiful there, and people were coming and being baptized. And it says in parentheses in verse 24, for John had not yet been put in prison. It's a little bit of a side note there, but very important in your understanding of John the Baptist's life, and even in this story here. Now, it says that there was a discussion that arose between some of John's disciples and a Jew over purification. And it seemed like that sparked a conversation between John's disciples and John. In verse 26, they came to John and they said to him, Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness, look, he is baptizing and all are going to him. I mean, the nerve that this Jesus here is going and essentially he stole your ministry and he's stealing your sheep. What's up with that? You were the one who baptized him. You were the one who set him up and as the front runner that you are, and you told everybody, hey, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And this is how he thanks you, by basically stealing your ministry right out from under you. John, teacher, rabbi, what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do in your ministry when all the focus and the attention is turning from you to Jesus? What's up with that? John's answer is so profound. It says so much about John's understanding of ministry. And I think that it says so much about how we are to understand our ministry. What do we do when the attention is going to Jesus and away from us? For John's disciples, it seems like this is a time for them to be, for John to be up in arms, and maybe a time for us to be up in arms and say, well, what do we need to do to get the attention back to ourselves? How can we turn this so that it's less about Jesus and more about us? But that's not what John does here. John gives three different aspects of ministry, of his ministry, that I think are true of all of our ministry. And if we understand this, if we understand these three things, then we will be perfectly fine with the focus and the attention and the glory going to Jesus and not to us. Look what he says. He says in verse 27, a person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. So the first thing you have to understand about your ministry is it's a privilege. Know that your ministry is a privilege. You didn't earn it. It's not a right. It's not something that you gain as the capstone of all of your years of doing the right thing. No, that's not how ministry works. God, in his grace, grants you this ministry. He is the one who calls you, not because of your works or anything like that, as Paul tells Timothy in 2 Timothy 1. It's not because of that, but because of his purpose and because of his grace. It's a privilege. Realize that when you serve the Lord, you are not doing this out of any reward for anything that you have done, but rather realize that you are doing this because God in his grace has called you to be a part of this great work. And notice that a person cannot receive even one thing unless it is given him from heaven. If you are called to preach the gospel, your calling to preach the gospel isn't given to you because you are a great communicator. It's not because of your excellent communication skills. It's not because of your superior Bible knowledge or anything like that. It's because God in his grace says, I want you. I want you to take my gospel to the ends of the earth. I want you to stand in the pulpit week in and week out and proclaim the good news of Christ and feed my sheep. I want you to be the disciple maker on campus. I want you to go to the unreached people groups that I have called you to. And I want you to plant the seeds that will eventually grow into a strong and vibrant and healthy church. It's not because of us. It's because of him. It's a privilege to serve the Lord. Well, not only is it a privilege to serve the Lord, but also we need to recognize our place in the ministry. We need to recognize the privilege of ministry, and we need to recognize our place in ministry. Look at what he says in verse 28. He says, you yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom, okay? The friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Okay, so notice what he's doing here. He's saying, I'm not the Christ. I'm not that guy. You already bore witness to the fact that I'm not that guy because you said that when you were talking in verse 26. He says, Rabbi, he who was with you across the Jordan, to whom you bore witness. Look, he is baptizing and all are going to him. So you've already borne me witness that I have borne witness that I'm not the Christ, okay? He says, I'm not that guy. I am the friend of the bridegroom. I'm the best man, okay? The bridegroom is the one who has the bride, not the best man. My job is not to usurp the bridegroom. My job is to make sure that the groom gets the bride. That's my place, okay? Your place in ministry is not to get the bride. That's not your job. Your job is to make sure that the groom, our Lord Jesus Christ, gets the bride. Your job is to make sure that the great vision that we see in Revelation 19 and 20 and following will come to pass. You have a place in that. As you are serving the Lord, as you are loving on his church, as you are loving the lost and the unbelieving and the unreached, as you are following God's call, your job isn't to take the attention away. Your job is to point the attention towards Jesus. You're the best man. And just as weird as it would be for the best man to barge his way in on the wedding day, so it should be weird to us to think that our responsibility in ministry or our great aim in ministry is to draw the attention to ourselves and not to Christ. You got to know the privilege of ministry. You got to know your place in ministry. And when you understand the privilege and when you understand your place, then you can understand the pleasure of ministry. Look what he says. He says, the friend, in verse 29, the friend of the bridegroom who stands and hears him rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. He loves to hear the bridegroom say, I do. He's been waiting all this time for that moment. And then he says, therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. Mission accomplished. The bride and the bridegroom are together. You love it when the pastor says, you may now kiss your bride. The best man doesn't get jealous. The best man was here for that purpose. And so he says, as the capstone of his ministry in verse 30, he must increase, but I must decrease. May that be your aim in ministry. Not that you would get the attention, but that as you are serving the Lord and serving the people and serving the lost, more and more you can step out of the view and the Christ, the bridegroom, stands prominently there, and he is the one calling them to himself. That's what ministry is about. So, as you contemplate your ministry, as you think about pastoring, as you think about going to the mission field, however the Lord has called you to serve him, use all of the resources that you have to make much of him and not of yourself.